municipalities. And today I'm very excited to be partnering with Sustainable CT and so many other partners to bring you all this presentation promoting walkability in your community. Today we have an amazing lineup of presenters, but I first want to go over a few housekeeping items. First is that we ask all attendees to remain muted throughout the presentation. This will allow presenters to be able to share their information with you effectively. We also want to encourage all attendees to be active participants by submitting questions through the chat box. These questions will be answered throughout the presentation. And with that, I'm going to hand it on off to Laura Baum.
Great, thank you so much. Hi everybody, my name is Laura Baum, and I'm on the board of directors of Bike Walk Connecticut. And Bike Walk Connecticut is a statewide nonprofit organization working to make Connecticut a better place to bike and walk. And we have been around since 2010, so as an organization we're about 10 years old. But I'm assuming that some of the folks here joining on the webinar aren't familiar with us, so I do want to take just a minute to explain a little bit about who we are and what we do with the hopes that we'll be able to make some connections and potentially work together in the future. So Bike Walk Connecticut's mission is we are changing the culture of transportation through advocacy and education to make bicycling and walking safe, feasible, and attractive for a healthier, cleaner Connecticut. And you can see here I've highlighted these words, advocacy and education. These are kind of the two main pillars of the work that we do. So on the advocacy side, we work at the state capitol to advance legislation that is helpful for biking and walking in Connecticut. And the 2021 legislative session will be starting in the first week of January and going into early June. It's not entirely clear at this point exactly how the session is going to work, how much will be in person given COVID restrictions, but certainly there will be a need for and an opportunity to advance important legislative priorities. So to give you a little background, in 2020, Bike Walk Connecticut advocated for a variety of different issues, including pedestrian safety in crosswalks, local speed limits, distracted driving, traffic impact studies, a greenways account, trail bonding, and many others. So between now and the end of December, Bike Walk Connecticut as an organization is going to be working on our 2021 legislative priorities. And I just wanted to call out to all of you that if you would like to get in touch with us with your ideas, questions, suggestions, I would encourage you to do that. I'm going to pop our email address and our website in the chat box after I'm done talking so you can reach out to us. Our website is bikewalkct.org. And then on the education side, our education work takes a bunch of different forms, from our Share the Road public education campaign to professional workshops, trainings like the one today, statewide summits, and of course bike education classes. An example of this bike education work that we do that I wanted to highlight today is a Train the Trainer workshop opportunity being organized through the Capital Region Council of Governments, CROG. Sort of unfortunately, given the timing, these applications are due on November 20th, so very soon. But I did want to highlight this really cool opportunity. There's going to be 10 workshops awarded to school districts, schools, towns around the state of Connecticut, basically getting the opportunity for this workshop to learn more about Bike Walk Connecticut's 4th grade bike education curriculum. The idea here is your PE teachers in your school district could all get trained. This curriculum has been developed over the course of 9 years and is really focused on this 4th grade age group, but works at the elementary level. And again, I know the timing is tight, but encourage you to check that out. And there's more information on our website about that opportunity. I also just wanted to highlight that on our website, we have a list of organizations that are doing this work in biking and walking throughout the state of Connecticut. I would encourage you guys to check out this list, hoping people can make connections with folks in their area that are doing similar work. And again, make a plea for you to reach out to us if there are organizations that you think should be added to this list. It's constantly growing. And then finally, I just want to connect back to kind of the why of walk audits. I know we're all coming to this work from different angles, but I think at the forefront of what most of us are doing, it's really focused on safety. Across the US, approximately 18 pedestrians were killed every single day in 2018. And statewide, at least 50 pedestrians have been killed so far in 2020 in our state. Obviously, one death is terrible, but it's unacceptable to see so many people dying on our streets and to see the rates increasing, which they have been. And the people that are most impacted by traffic violence are people of color, older people, and people that are walking in low-income communities. And we must do better. I think we're all working to make Connecticut a place where people can get where they need to go by walking, rolling, or riding in a way that feels safe, easy, and enjoyable, and in a way in which they feel respected. I believe that local walk audits and the hard work that we do after the walk audit can help move us towards this vision of safety and accessibility. So thank you so much for your time. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sahar.
So I'm Sahar Amjad. I work at the Transport Hartford Academy at the Center for Latino Progress, and we're going to briefly go over how to conduct a walk audit and then go into how to make an effective report based off of that audit. Generally speaking, a walk audit is an opportunity for community members, community leaders to assess the safety, accessibility, and comfort of their built environment and make sure that they have an opportunity to have their voices heard. Preparation is honestly the most important part of how to conduct a walk audit. You need to choose a location and a date, and locations can be chosen based off of community members or community leaders sharing their concerns about areas that have traffic, areas that have had a lot of collisions, anything like that. And the City of Hartford also has an interactive crash map that we can take a quick look at. So we have the interactive crash map from Hartford, and it shows different kinds of traffic incidents from collisions to pedestrian fatalities or injuries. And that is one useful way to make sure that you're choosing an area that is meaningful to the community. And once your location and date have been set, you want to make sure to send out the invitations to community members, local government officials, police officers, if your community is comfortable working with the police 3 to 4 weeks in advance, and make sure to include a rain date as well.
Sahar, this is Alyssa from Sustainable CT. I just wanted to let you know, I don't know why it's not showing on our screens. We can't see the crash map. Should there be one? Somebody just noted that in the chat.
There should be. Give me 1 minute.
Okay, thanks for everyone while we bear with technical difficulties. And I also saw a question. Hi, Doug Houslowden from New Haven. This webinar will be recorded. So for folks who want to go back and look at particular pieces or the beginning, if you signed on late, it'll all be here. And we're so glad you're all here learning about this important topic.
So this is just a still of one of the crash maps in Hartford. We have a more specified version here. Everyone can see this now, right? Okay. So crash maps and talking to community leaders and community organizations about areas of concern are good ways to find locations and make sure to send those out 3 to 4 weeks in advance with a rain date. Once you choose the area that you are going to have the walk audit on, starting and endpoints are critical. You want to know where your group is going to meet up and where they are going to circle back towards the end. Usually it takes 1 mile to 1.5 miles to make sure that we can fully document the area and make sure that any glaring concerns are well documented. And you want to make sure that you can also identify group leaders. So a town planner who might be attending, a council person, community leader, and you want to inform them ahead of time because they will have a slightly heightened level of responsibility the day of. Speaking of the day of, in your meeting spot, you want to make sure you have all the attendees sign in either electronically or on a clipboard, include any email addresses, phone numbers, affiliations, so that you have a group to send a draft report out to for input. And you're going to want to review the audit route as well and identify any group leaders there. So we have the sample route right here from a walk audit that I conducted back in the summer with our Transport Hartford interns. and it shows the highlighted route that we took, and it shows the path that the 4 groups took as well.
Sahar, we have a question that came in that says,
Yes.
are there any tips or advice for conducting audits during COVID? So I'll have you answer in a minute, but I did want to share, one of our speakers is from Old Lyme, and through Sustainable CT conducted a very successful and inclusive walk audit this past June in the midst of COVID. So we'll have a detailed case study, but Sahar, is there anything you want to share now with respect to your experience?
Yeah, so obviously we are all wearing masks. We tried to keep our groups as small as possible. If you are going to conduct a walk audit anytime soon with COVID cases spiking, I would recommend creating an actual sign-up sheet and having a cap of how many people can attend or register for the walk audit. We also invested in personal PA sets with headsets and microphones so that the group leaders can still be heard even when we're trying to socially distance and maintain as much distance between us as possible. Hand sanitizer is always a good bet. Just make sure to bring it with you along the way. So again, for the day of, one of your biggest and most useful tools is going to be the AARP walk audit packet, and we have that linked afterwards, and we can drop it in the chat as soon as I'm done with the presentation. If your group is large enough, you can split it into smaller groups, and the AARP packet is set up in a way that it makes it easy to have 4 distinct groups who cover crossing streets and intersections, sidewalks, driver behavior and safety, and comfort and appeal. And we want to encourage safe phone use for notes and photos, because your report is going to be mainly based off of photos to back up any observations and suggestions that you made. Before you leave, you want to establish a return time to the starting point. We generally like to take an hour to an hour and a half for walk audits. And if you are the leader of it, you're going to want to facilitate discussion, collect notes, any emails, photos, so that way you can create the most effective report afterwards. So writing a report, generally speaking, good idea to include a reason for conducting the walk audit, area of concern for residents, community organizations, give a little bit of background into the area that you are conducting the audit on. With the report, you're going to want to think visual, visual, visual. A lot of photos to back everything up, people who have attended, people who are conducting the walk audits. And you also want to make sure to provide recommendations and solutions, and this is where a little bit more research might come in, to suggest improvements to areas for safety and comfort. Once you've written your report, make sure to send the draft out to all the participants of the walk audits and make sure that you include their comments and any additions that they would like to make in there, and then send the final report out to everyone who attended and to your town decision makers, so town planners, Department of Public Works, anybody who needs to see the data that's been collected by the community.
Sahar, I'm gonna pause again. We have another question about who should participate. So I'll just read the question as it is, and this is from Jane. Thanks so much for typing it in. What community members are invited to these walk audits? Are members of the Connecticut Department of Transportation, transit agencies, law enforcement, city employees usually invited to form collaborative solutions for pedestrians? And if so, what does participation turnout usually look like?
So when I conducted my walk audit over the summer, we invited DOT members, we invited Hartford Police, we invited community organization members. Those people, generally, the people who are in the area that you're conducting the walk audit in, the people who live in that environment, or the people who go to work in that environment, it's a good idea to reach out to them because they stay in that space every day and they have the best feed on what is going on there on a daily basis. But your town officials, town planners, Department of Public Works, DOT, any local representatives, it's a good idea to reach out to them as well. Even if they can't make it, they understand and they see that there are community members who are concerned enough to go out and take out their own time and conduct the walk audit.
That's great. Thanks, Sahar.
So we have a few slides taken from the Washington Street walk audit that we conducted over the summer with our summer interns, just to give you an example of what a report should look like. So we have the location and the date. We have the program that everything is set up with. Our background shows who initially came to us with the concerns, why we decided to take it on, and we have a sample invitation on that background slide as well. And we also have a list of attendees just to make sure that everybody who showed up is in some way thanked for their time, and it shows that they were available. We have the route laid out. We split into 4 groups, so you can see we have the highlighted route and then the paths that our groups took, and they walked down the streets, crossed as they met in the middle, and then walked back down to the streets. And we had our start and end point be right in front of the Connecticut Children's Medical Center. And group 1 is on here as an example to show the level of detail that we're looking for, and it also to illustrate why pictures are so important. We have one of the intersections of concern highlighted, and why that's an area of concern and any recommendations being made to that area. And then another example of the entrance into the Connecticut Children's Medical Center. Again, a picture, why it's a concern, and any recommendations that need to be, that are being made.
Sahar, could you for a moment please go back to the previous slide? You mentioned that the Washington Street walk audit had a background to it in terms of why you all were doing it. And I know Laura Baum from Bike Walk Connecticut, for who folks who were signed on late might not have heard some of her conversation around safety. So I wonder if you could just share a little bit about, you know, what prompted this particular walk audit.
So this particular walk audit was because we had a staff member from Connecticut Children's Medical Center reach out to a community organization, as you can see in the background, SINA, and they were concerned about speeding cars down Washington Street. And obviously that's a point of concern for them, as they want to make sure that their patients and the patients' families who are coming in to visit or drop patients off are safe. And they asked us to see if there was anything that we could do to observe and then make recommendations to control traffic around the area.
Okay, thank you for that.
If you want to jump in with a more general safety talk.
That's great, Sarah, thank you.
So we at Transport Hartford have conducted walk audits in towns all across Connecticut, and the full list of reports can be found on the website, which I can drop here, including the Washington Street audit that I just showed you the sample of. And we have all of the resources here as well, the AARP walk audit toolkit that I mentioned, a video on the basics of a walk audit, our links, and also we have a November 23rd walk audit with a registration. We're trying to keep safe with COVID, so there is a cap on that. If you have access to this PowerPoint, you can hop onto the link and try to register, but that is going to be kicking off the 2020 Multimodal Summit. Thank you. Oh, I'm going to pass it off to Sustainable CT now.
That's great, Sahar. Thank you so much. I just wanted to pause for a minute. We'll share our screen momentarily, but I just wanted to know if there were any other questions. People have been great about typing them into the chat box, but if there are others, and there is one, I'll read it now. Do you include local bicycle and pedestrian count information for the audited area if it's available, Sahar? Or
That
Tony,
would be
you can unmute too.
That would be something that I think we would include later on in the report if that information is relevant at the time. When we're conducting the walk audit, we will try to keep, we have the data, we'll try to keep that in mind, but that's something that would come into the report later if it's pertinent.
Okay, that's great. It's nice to meet everyone. My colleague Lisa Noriega and I are going to be presenting momentarily. So Lisa, thanks for going ahead and sharing your screen. So thanks everyone for being here today. I know folks have signed on at different times. So for those who came on right on time, apologies for repeating, but I just wanted to encourage everyone to keep the questions coming. I think it's more lively and dynamic when we can all interact in real time, even though we're in this altered virtual environment for the time being. And also incredible thanks to Tony Chirolas, whose face you saw for a minute, and who's on quietly in the background, but is the mastermind between the upcoming multimodal summit. So hope many of you will be participating next week, but just wanted to give him a shout out and deep appreciation for his leadership now, and also in all things transportation related. So again, my name is Alyssa Norwood. I'm with Sustainable CT. I know we'll probably light up the chat in doing this, but it'll be great and it'll be fun. We have a large number of people on. Some folks have probably never heard of Sustainable CT. Others might be part of a registered or certified community. So I'm just going to ask everyone to take a quick minute in the chat and just share. It could be a word or a sentence. What's your relationship with Sustainable CT? So we'll take a moment to allow that to happen. And then while you're typing, I just wanted to acknowledge a question that was asked in the chat earlier. And the question was, what's a good way to incorporate the equity toolkit into the walk audit? So at the end of the planned presentation we have, I'm happy to share my screen and show folks our equity toolkit just so everybody knows what that is. But basically, it's a process in anything that you do, whether it's transportation related or anything else in your community, from the beginning to be really thoughtful about creating inclusive, deliberative processes that impact everyone in the community, not just those who are most visible. So we can talk about the applicability there. Old Lyme, who's presenting after me, did a great job, and I see lots of great things happening in the chat. So you all can keep doing that. And Lisa, why don't you head to the next slide? So based on the chat, it seems that many of you are familiar with Sustainable CT, but for those who aren't, Sustainable CT is a voluntary certification program. So I know we probably have some multitaskers on the call. It's great your attention is here, but if at any point you want to go visit our website, which is further up in the chat at this point, if one of my co-hosts wants to put the Sustainable CT website in, that'd be great. If people want to click and go and visit. So we're sustainableCT.org, and if you click on the Actions tab at the top of the page, you'll see we have a vast roadmap of actions that any community can take, regardless of size, resources, rural, suburban, urban, to make your community more livable, more thriving, more resilient. There are resources that support you in doing that. So this webinar is one of those. We're hoping that it's a roadmap and support for helping complete our walkability audit action, which we'll talk about in more detail in a moment. And then for completion of actions across a broad range of categories, towns get recognized and certified. But really at the heart of the program, this effort has always been by towns for towns. It is voluntary. And as a result, the municipal leaders who conceived of this vision decided that it really needed to be flexible and that every town is different and each community needs to do what honors them. So next slide. Great. So I just wanted to take a moment to kind of talk about roles and relationships. So a big thanks to Abby, who you heard from at the beginning, from Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. They continue to be a really valued partner. And the program really began as a result of a collaboration of their task force on sustainability. A number of mayors and first selectmen got together and decided that it was important to create a roadmap that was voluntary, that had these sort of resources and supports. So with CCM, Eastern Connecticut State University, which is where I work at its Institute for Sustainable Energy, co-created with over 200 different folks across the state the Sustainable CT program, and Eastern Connecticut State University continues to manage and oversee Sustainable CT, which is now its own independent nonprofit. We have a growing number of funders, but I also want to celebrate and recognize our 3 founding funders who continue to provide us with generous support, and that's the Smart Seed Foundation, the Common Sense Fund, and the Emily Hall Trevane Foundation. Next slide. So our program is growing and continues to have robust participation across the state. So you can see our map. The blue pins indicate communities that are registered. I saw several folks in the chat mention that they're part of a Sustainable CT registered community, which involves passing a resolution noting that you've formed a sustainability team who's going to dedicate time and attention to pursuing certification on a timeline that works for the community and just generally support sustainability. And then once registered in the program, towns begin work on pursuing points across this menu of actions and can pursue one of 2 levels currently of certification, bronze and silver. So you can see here we have 112, I believe actually now 113 as of last week, of the state's 169 municipalities participating in Sustainable CT. And at the end of October, and to be honored shortly, we have a total of 61 certified communities, 17 that were certified in 2020, and some of whom are on today's webinar. So congratulations to all, and we're delighted at the breadth of participation in this framework, and a testament to the broad participation and continued co-creation as we grow and evolve. Next slide. So this next section talks about the linkages between sustainability and transportation. You know, for many folks on this call, they might be self-evident, but I'm now going to hand it over to my colleague, Lisa Noriega, who's going to delve a little bit more into that topic. So Lisa, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Alyssa. So hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Noriega, and I'm an intern with Sustainable CT. Going to be talking about the linkages between sustainability and transportation and Sustainable CT's walk audit action. So Sustainable CT has a very broad definition of sustainability, and we've crafted our actions around that definition so that they will not only enhance environmental well-being, but also social and economic well-being in our participating municipalities. And as you see here, transportation is one of our 9 categories that municipalities must complete at least 1 action within in order to be certified with Sustainable CT. And here on the right are the 5 actions within it that towns can choose from. There are many obvious connections between transportation and sustainability, but I wanted to contextualize that by asking you all to just think about how COVID has impacted transportation in your community, and it's most likely affected you on a personal level as well. We've all now seen incredible changes that can occur when people stop driving, not only environmental changes, but also social and economic changes. But not only has this pandemic shown us how integral transportation is to our daily lives, it's also shown us this really unique window of opportunity to create more sustainable transportation methods and systems in our communities. And at Sustainable CT, we craft our actions in a way that will produce co-benefits for communities. Improving community walkability through walk audits in particular achieves many of the co-benefits pictured here. And if you go to any action on our website, each one will have several of these, which we call benefit icons. And improving walkability in your community can have positive environmental impacts through freeing up congested roadways, fostering cleaner air, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It can enhance health and wellness, of course, through increasing physical activity and improving mental health, and can help to build the local community by connecting residents and non-vehicular transportation modes with non-vehicular transportation modes to the rest of the community and its services, which in turn improves equity outcomes. And then economic well-being is also enhanced through connecting people to more resources in the community and reducing residents' overall travel costs, thereby giving them more money to spend in local businesses. So as you can see, improving community walkability is truly integral to building a sustainable community, not just environmentally, but also socially and economically. So Sustainable CT's walk audit action encourages municipalities to conduct an inventory and analysis of the availability of sidewalks, crosswalks, off-road pedestrian paths, pedestrian traffic signals, and other features. And then based on those findings and a community engagement process, the audit should include specific recommendations on opportunities to improve walkability. We also encourage towns through this action to follow an intentional route when conducting walk audits, because if the route is or could be highly utilized upon improvement, it can empower communities to evaluate a better method of transportation for themselves and their unique town needs. And we're continuously improving upon our actions though, and we've made revisions to our walk audit action for 2021, which Alyssa will go over in a minute. But I first wanted to say that all of our actions, including this one, include ladders of opportunities so that all towns, large or small, rural or urban, like Alyssa said, can find something to complete within their specific capacities and resources. And Alyssa, I'll pass it off to you now.
Great. So, we have this script, but obviously we're in a dynamic environment and people are asking questions and thoughts are arising. So I'm going to pause for a minute before jumping into this with a couple of thoughts. So the first is, by all means, again, keep your questions coming, whether for me or any other presenter. We want to make this as conversational as possible. The second is I'm reflecting on the work of Bike Walk Connecticut a number of years ago, who invited Mark Fenton to the state of Connecticut. And for those who aren't familiar with who Mark Fenton is, he's this really interesting guy. He's a walk advocate. He's a professor now, I believe at Tufts. Is that right, Laura? He's a former aspiring Olympic walker. He didn't make it past the Olympic trials, but he had a competitive shot at it. And when we think about the importance of doing walk audits, so Laura already talked about safety, and that's obviously at the heart of all of this. But, what's so powerful about them? And I think back to something that he asked us to do in a presentation, and that's this notion of kind of remembering in your childhood formative experiences around transportation. And it was a really powerful exercise because when we think back to childhood, some of us might have stories about the long car rides and the games that we played, but by and large in the room, when we all went through this experience and processed, it was really about the skinned knee the first time we went biking, or the empowerment that comes at a very young age when you don't have the keys to a car yet to be able to go somewhere yourself on your own 2 feet, or a bike, or a scooter, and just like the incredible extent to which these experiences shape who we are. And there was this real disconnect between, if we look at our lives now, on average, I'm sure we have an exceptional group here, and we're probably as a group biased toward biking and walking, but by and large, if you looked in the room at our collective memories and the extent to which they reflected non-motorized transportation, versus how much time in our daily lives we each spend in a car versus walking or biking, something was seriously out of balance. So to bring this back to this whole discussion around walk audits and why they're so important, one, having this direct experience of reconnecting with a different mode of transportation for some people. For others, this isn't an issue, but so many people spend so much time in the car to just kind of reorient and remember, and to do it with a purpose is powerful. Obviously, COVID makes this aspect a little more restrictive, but we won't be in this situation forever. But as we go through the experience of a walk audit, there's a reason that experiential education is elevated in different settings, right? We can all sit here and look at these slides together, but there is nothing more powerful than walking on a road with a walker and realizing that the sidewalk is uneven and I can't traverse this space, or getting across the street with a mobility impairment and realizing that the signal isn't fast enough, or walking on a sidewalk and feeling cars zoom by at 40 miles per hour. So this community engagement, experiential education, it's great, it's valuable, it's important. Cheryl's going to talk a lot more about this in the Old Lyme presentation, but I just, as a point of passion to kind of, we're in our slides a lot, so I just wanted to ground ourselves and get everybody excited again. So with that, I wanted to share that Sustainable CT is dynamic and always engaged in this ongoing process of learning, and we change our actions every year. So because this community engagement piece is so important when we release our 2020 program, Sahar mentioned this already, we're directing people to the AARP Walk Audit Guide. We're encouraging people to do just what we're doing now, have some kind of training event or orientation prior to actually going out there to understand and contextualize walk audits. And again, to have as diverse a group as possible participate, because that's where the real power in the exercise is. Next slide. So the last piece that I wanted to talk about is the Sustainable CT Community Match Fund. Lisa, if you could go ahead and advance to it. So the Sustainable CT Community Match Fund is a grassroots crowdfunding based platform whereby people in communities that have great ideas in a really fast, flexible, unconventional way, very different than obtaining grants, can get money right away to do great things in their community. So round one has happened. We're in the midst of round two, and actually are just in the midst of announcing we passed the $1 million mark. You could see it here if you do the math in terms of community investment. But the way it works is someone with a great idea, like Tony, who wanted to put on this multimodal summit, will put up a page, start crowdfunding, and people in the communities who are being served will put their money into this project, and Sustainable CT matches dollar for dollar the funds as long as there's alignment with our sustainability program goals. A broad number of projects. Again, I think we're now up to over 90 projects in even more towns. Average project budget $17,000. But one of the really interesting pieces is this medium value of $50. In the end, most of these projects are driven by just neighbors, friends, family members making, and businesses making small donations, and one donation at a time, we're transforming communities. Next slide. So you can check out our website. You can kind of see the impact, just how broad this is, where the projects are. They're all over the state. Our donors are everywhere, some of them going beyond the boundaries of Connecticut. Next slide. And then you can visit our Community Match Fund website. You could see the URL up there. I'd ask again one of my colleagues who's not presenting, if you don't mind, putting it in the chat box, patronicity.com/sustainableCT. You could check out the great projects that are already up there. And as you think about doing a walk audit in your community, or the advertisement that Laura mentioned, implementing bicycle education, which is also available for Sustainable CT points. Again, there's nothing more powerful than this direct experience of giving people the tools to experience non-motorized transportation. Next slide. So that's it. I know I promised I'd show folks the equity toolkit, but we still have 2 more presenters. So I want to honor their time. And if we have time at the end, we'll go ahead and switch back to that. But I'd now like to, we'll stop sharing our screen and we'll turn it over to Cheryl in Old Lyme, who is part of a bronze certified community and did amazing work this past spring leading their community through a walk audit in what we all know to be challenging conditions. So Cheryl, thank you so much, and looking forward to hearing about Old Lyme's journey. And Cheryl, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. There we go. Well, thank you, Alyssa. And I really, what you said about, I believe the name was Mark Fenton, talking about remembering transportation modes from your childhood really resonated with me. And I'm finding today, as I'm sure many of you are, I'm connecting with people either through Zoom or hiking and walking together. And so I think more than ever, walking and walkability is so key to us, especially during this pandemic time when we're not sitting having coffee together or lunch together, we're walking together. So I'm Cheryl Poirier. I'm a volunteer and a resident of Old Lyme and on the Board of Selectmen Sustainable Old Lyme team. You have my email address there and I'll share it again at the end. We did, as Alyssa said, receive our bronze certification recently in October, which recognizes sustainable practices of various town government staff, commissions, and board members in Old Lyme. And in addition to the good work of other groups within the government municipality, the Selectmen's Sustainable Old Lyme team took on our own initiative to conduct a pedestrian audit and chose to do so within Sustainable Connecticut's equity framework as outlined in the 2020 action. Whoops. Hold on. There we go. The 2020 action of 9.1, optimizing for equity. And this enabled us to always consider viewing walkability and our pedestrian audit to measure walkability in an inclusive manner. So Sustainable Connecticut provides a multi-step toolkit that Alyssa mentioned with which to undertake your initiative. And in this case, that was our pedestrian audit. The toolkit asks questions to frame your effort, beginning with who lives and works in our community, and then how can we connect with each other? How can we create opportunities for dialogue? And how can we collaborate and co-create? And then finally, always looking to improve after refining and revisiting the process. The timing of our initial process for the pedestrian audit was spring 2020. And as we all know, that was a time of uncertainty and concern for so many, but also a time when many organizations and nonprofits were scrambling to ensure their populations and audiences not only had the resources they needed, such as food and rent money, but also online access to things like faith celebrations and municipal public meetings. So although so many people were forced to slow down, many organizations were ramping up and very busy. And you will see this plays an important role, or is just important as our own necessity to remain flexible and resourceful came to light. So the team began by analyzing census data and local demographic data. Our population of Old Lyme skews older than the state or county average. A recent town survey, which included an interesting finding, was that older residents in Old Lyme are considering moving to other towns with a quality of life that includes village-like amenities and walkability. Meanwhile, as the pandemic moved into its stay-at-home phase, we were witnessing more people walking our town's main village street, Lime Street, as well as hiking in open spaces. And I should mention, in case anyone doesn't know, Old Lyme, unlike the communities Sahar shared with us in her discussion of audits, Old Lyme is a small town. It's not exactly rural, but close to rural, and population about 7,000 people. In the summer, that swells to 12,000 people with our beach community. So based on the demographic and survey data, we began reaching out to town organizations, and as you know, organizations like faith communities and the senior center. And as I mentioned, they were ramping up to serve their populations and were quite busy during this time. We spoke to the senior center, who had a growing concern about older isolated residents during the stay-at-home orders. And this older community, we would find were not on their computers or had Wi-Fi in the spring or email addresses that they looked at. So the senior center was really reaching out to many of the members through telephone calls, in-person, you know, doorstep visits, and that sort of thing. So we also reached out to our older community members in town, including volunteers with the Conservation Commission and others, to get a sense of their interest in things such as walkability. So we found reaching out to the older population through phone and email and some small socially distanced gathering on the sidewalk in front of a candy store on Lime Street, that it was difficult to reach many people. There was low adoption in the spring of online resources such as Zoom, but I'm sure that's likely improving at this point as everyone realizes being online, if they're able to resource-wise, is a useful thing. We also utilized our local online newspaper to encourage people to meet the team outdoors in late April to talk about sustainable Connecticut and some of the actions we hope to take on in an equitable and inclusive way. We learned that many older residents wish to remain vibrant and engaged, and the pandemic had heightened their concern for this ability. Walking is a free, healthy lifestyle choice, and one where you could socialize with neighbors or walking buddies, albeit at a social distance. Our core question became, how can we ensure the healthy pleasures of walking and the community connections made while doing so are available to all regardless of physical abilities? We involved our older residents to participate and co-create this process, which became the pedestrian audit. Our phase 1 audit had 4 locations chosen. First was what I've mentioned before, Lime Street, which is the main village connector. It's a street through the main village. Townwoods Road, which is a busy road without sidewalks, which the senior center is located on. Shore Road, which is a state road busy with beach access, again with no sidewalks. And Boston Post Road, a state road, which the section we looked at had some small businesses and limited sidewalks. To be honest, we were not considering phase 1 to be a phase 1. We expected that to be the audit itself, but because of low attendance in the spring by our target population, which were older or physically, people with limited physical abilities, they were not finding it safe to leave their homes in the spring. So we determined a more focused effort was necessary, and we decided to have a second audit, our phase 2, which would focus on one street, which many found desirable to walk and was considered safe. We were finding the 3 state roads were not even safe enough to have our folks doing the audit on. So we chose to focus on Lime Street itself for our elderly participants to audit. Lime Street in Old Lyme is a street where equal access is key. It's a beautiful street where we encourage cultural tourists to visit and walk. There are town services on Lime Street, including Town Hall and the Town Library. There are many small businesses, including art galleries. And we were seeing more and more the importance of strolling or walking someplace where you might run into a friend or neighbor in front of an ice cream shop and make social connections in this isolated time. There are special events there, such as our Memorial Day Parade. And other than the town hall and town library, all parking is on the street. So it really is a street best enjoyed by foot, and it is our most impactful route. And as you can see, our length that we audited was 0.7 miles, or about a 15-minute walk. It was only on the west side of Lime Street, which has sidewalks for the full length. And it encompasses the key organizations or locations we talked about, such as Town Hall, the library, one of our churches, and small businesses. We widely promoted this phase 2 audit, which took place in July. And we did that through e-newsletters, social media, the First Selectman's weekly newsletter to residents, And then I know we talked earlier about the pandemic and how to do an audit during COVID. And because I wish we thought to have headsets, as Sahar was talking about earlier, but we were finding, first of all, one of the most common disabilities our walkers had was hearing impairment. And so to try to social distance with a leader and listen to each other, we were finding it very hard to have social distance auditors together. So instead, we chose to do this audit asking people to be with their own bubble, whether that be a spouse or someone in their home, rather than a group activity. And that increased our participation among the elderly. We had 17 participants audit Lime Street. We provided instruction ahead of time. And I would say that if we had been able to create or thought to create a video that could be on YouTube or emailed to people, that would have been helpful with our instructions ahead of time. And in the phase 1 of our audit, during co-creation, we learned that some of our participants had walkers or canes, and they were also carrying their audit form, and there was some dexterity issues at hand. So we did print out the audit forms on cardstock so that they would be sturdier on the clipboards. We ensured larger font, and we kept it double-sided so there were fewer pages to flip and switch over. We also chose to reach more people than the 17 that chose to participate in the audit itself by supplementing it with a SurveyMonkey survey. And that was just beyond the audit. The survey helped us reach 313 respondents and learn more about their walking behavior and where they walked and why they choose to walk, perhaps on Lime Street or elsewhere. We collected these names and contact information for further and future inclusion in the walkability conversation. And we relied on organizations such as the town's faith communities, senior center online newspapers, and emails, and the First Selectman's newsletter to communicate both the audit and then that SurveyMonkey survey. By the end of July, we had an excellent audit. And again, because people did it on their own with their own bubbles, it took over 3+ weeks to have all of the audits come in to us rather than having one date with a rain date where everyone would do their audit on the same day. So by the end of July, we had an excellent audit of Lime Street co-created with those we were hoping to serve, the elderly and others with physical disabilities. And we learned that Lime Street was growing in importance as a town center for outdoor community connections. By including elderly or disabled auditors, we learned some things we wouldn't have otherwise, and that included some perceptions in addition to objective facts. For instance, although there are already 5 or 6 benches along that 0.7-mile stretch of Lime Street for people who are walking and who would like to stop and rest, the perception was none of those benches were available to walkers because they were outside businesses or residences, which would imply that those benches were only for customers of those businesses or the homeowners themselves. And so we've been able to suggest that benches be placed outside of Town Hall on its front lawn, which of course is a public location and would have the perception of being available to all walkers. This would be more inclusive to all. And we have had one presentation to the Board of Selectmen, and there's an additional presentation coming in which we're going to be suggesting a committee to just focus on walkability and bikeability across all of Old Lyme. So how would we refine, revisit, and improve? I think the process can never start early enough. I know Sahar talked about 6 weeks, and I think that is great. And I would just never underestimate how much time it takes to pull people together, and especially in the equity format, the toolkit, gathering people's perceptions and what their concerns are. Semantics matter. At one point, we had a group promoting our audit as a survey because they thought the word audit was confusing, so they called it a survey. But then later, when we added our own SurveyMonkey survey, it really created a lot of confusion. I know that if we were to redo this at this point or in 2021, we have a greater population more comfortable with YouTube and Zoom, and so we could probably take advantage of that for offline conversations or pre-meetings, gathering people's concerns and interests. We would, and this again came up in Sahar's presentation, the importance of people using their phone cameras to document their walks. I don't think we encouraged auditors strongly enough to use their cameras, and even to remember to pull out their phones and use their cameras to take pictures documenting their walks. And again, there were some issues around handling a clipboard and their cane or walker in some cases, as well as using their camera. And I would continue to add people throughout the process and ensure there are feedback mechanisms from the beginning so that you can collect people's contact information beyond telephone numbers or postal mail addresses, but also to be sure to gather email addresses when people have them. So thank you again. I'm happy to see the questions under chat, and my email address is sustainableoldlyme@gmail.com. And next we will be hearing from Amy Chambers, a planner from the city of Hartford. Thank you.
All right, let's see. Okay, thank you so much, Cheryl, and thank you to everyone for having me today. My name is Amy Chambers. I am the Director of Planning for the City of Hartford, and I am going to talk a little bit about the perspective of local government when it comes to walk audits. I wanted to begin by talking a little bit about Hartford's Plan of Conservation and Development. It was adopted in May of this year, and one of the main goals of the plan is to improve mobility and transport for all of our residents. In the plan, we talk about specifically prioritizing bus, rail, biking, and pedestrian infrastructure within the city. We're a city with 32% of households that do not have access to cars. So in addition to prioritizing mobility in our master plan, we've taken a number of action steps to address and prioritize complete streets. Those include adopting a bicycle master plan, which we use to implement in a number of different projects, removing mandatory parking minimums citywide, creating parking requirements for bicycles in different developments, and adding as well more energy towards implementation of micromobility. Finally, we want to do our best to continue to work with partner organizations and residents to address issues. So I wanted to take the time to discuss kind of different tenets of walk audits from our perspective. We feel like walk audits are a really great tool for engagement. I think we've heard a number of times today from the other speakers that the intention is to be able to work with residents to really identify what their experience is along any corridor that they are traversing. From the perspective of government, we're able to utilize that information to to be able to build upon the plans that we are writing. Most recently, we wrote a complete streets plan and utilized a lot of the feedback that we received from walk audits from Transport Hartford and those that we have hosted ourselves as well. In addition, we heard today individuals discussing the recommendations that come from walk audits. I can't stress enough how important it is for those observations to be recorded and for them to be those reports to come back to city officials because we definitely utilize the feedback that we get from those reports to inform any short and long-term solution that we may be able to implement into new projects and into projects that are already planned. This is information that can really help to improve those projects and to improve the ownership that residents then have over those projects at the end. And then finally, that information can also be utilized by city officials when seeking funding opportunities. So again, if we're looking for the opportunity to work on a new project or to do some sort of demonstration, being able to reference what's written in those reports really comes in handy. This photo that I have on this slide is a picture of the corner of Charter Oak Avenue and Main Street. We did this demonstration project last fall and worked with the community to paint this curb bump out. And the idea for this really came about as part of feedback that we received through this type of process. So we've been working as well with blue zones, which I'll talk a little bit more about on another slide, but I wanted to include from another presentation that the Blue Zones group did, tips for successful walk auditing. And in line with this idea of engagement, recommendation, and analysis, just to note that they also, to highlight rather, that they also say that this concept of shared discovery and shared solutions is really important, that in the walk audit process, there is no expert. So it's important that, city officials are receiving the information, but really kind of the experience of all of the people who are participating in that audit and voicing their concerns is the value that comes out of it. In addition, I'm noting that post-walk download is critical. I'm going back to that concept of recommendations, making sure that information is downloaded in a way that it can then be shared with a number of different entities, and to think practically about what is next, because again, there are so many opportunities that can come out of the information that's received. So with regard to that concept of engagement, I wanted to just give an example. Albany Avenue is underway right now. It's a pedestrian improvement and safety project. Many of you know that Albany Avenue is a state right-of-way, and the Department of Transportation has been working on this streetscape improvement project now for quite some time. During the course of this project, we've had a number of meetings with residents and merchants in the area who've voiced concern about the usability of the space as it's been designed. And so Transport Hartford actually started working with these residents to organize and to do a walk audit, which highlighted for the city some of the concerns that maybe we need to revisit with the Department of Transportation. Through that process, we were able to be responsive to the residents and to the merchants with regard to some of the things that they highlighted, and to be able to kind of make changes in order to make the road a more usable space. Because yes, while it is a state right-of-way, it is also really the lifeblood of the community within the Upper Albany area of Hartford. We did a follow-up walk audit. The city of Hartford actually hosted that to not only to revisit some of the items that came out of the Transport Hartford walk audit, but as well to be able to follow up on some of the other concerns that the residents continue to address. And to really be able to, in this instance, walk through the avenue and through the project with the construction plans in hand, because it can be very overwhelming for someone who's not necessarily used to looking at construction plans to be able to imagine what that will look like when it is put into place. And so being able to do that and to be able to reference those plans and to be able to talk a bit more in detail about what a certain corner or what a certain block will look like as it's designed was a really, I think, valuable part of this process. Finally, just with regard to COVID and the COVID environment, there was a final walk audit which was done just in the month of August. And that actually took place over the span of 3 weeks, breaking up into much smaller groups so that we could continue to kind of close the loop on some of the items that had been brought up over the course of time. I mentioned before that one of the things that the city does is partner with Transport Hartford, who hosts a number of walk audits across the city. And from the standpoint of being able to take and receive and make those recommendations, Transport Hartford does a really great job of linking the walk audits that they do with projects, whether they're planned projects or projects that the city has begun to explore. So these are just photos from documents that Transport Hartford has put together. And one of them, the one mentioning the healthy food hub at Main Street in Albany, is a portion of the city that's really, we're working on creating plans at this point in time with regard to the Arrowhead block that you can kind of see in the center photo where the singular Flatiron shaped building is. And having this information is just really important as we begin to embark on this project to kind of better understand what the needs are as we think about how we address the intersection as a whole, but also the pedestrian zones along the way. And then from the standpoint of analysis, there's a lot of really great information that comes out of each of these walk audits that helps us move forward. So on the left, I believe Tony put into the chat a note about the Slow Streets project, and this flyer was the flyer that we circulated for the unveiling of the Slow Street that we designed on Hampton Street in the north end of Hartford. This project is the project that we did in partnership with Degree Deodorant and Blue Zones, and that is still underway. We received funding to be able to design a bike boulevard or a road that is maybe not a main thoroughfare and meant to be able to create a more comfortable environment for less experienced bikers. And this process started out with a walk audit. There are a few locations within the city where we're doing this activity, and in each of those locations we communicated with the local neighborhood group and residents to organize and to bring people out to do a walk audit, to really be able to get a good idea of what people would like to see implemented as far as physical interventions in the road that may help to make the road feel safer for younger and less experienced bike riders. And then we're working now on a redesign of our North Main Street streetscape, and Transport Hartford previously did a walk audit along this road, where one of the key items that they took from that walk audit was that there were concerns about accessibility. It's really wonderful that we were able to go into working with our advisory group with that information and to be able to draw some of those linkages, because one of the real takeaways we've taken from working with the members of our advisory group is that they too share that concern. And so we want to make sure that that's prioritized along the way and as we do that redesign. So finally, I wanted to kind of just talk for a second about how we try to tie this all together. So our Hartford 311 information system has a website and an app version, and we have tried to prioritize some of the kind of main issues and items that we hear as the result of these walk audits and other concerns with regard to pedestrian safety around the city. And so we have implemented a traffic calming section of that website so that people can actually log on and report where they think that there needs to be some kind of traffic calming intervention, some of the most common requests that we receive. And allow us then to be able to collect that data to, on an ongoing basis, be able to respond as well. We're using this information and the information that we get from walk audit reports that we really hang on to and go back to as we start to look at different sections of road. To be able to come up with a more comprehensive and responsive way to respond to the concerns that residents have in our communities. I think, one of the most important points that I can make here is that hanging on to those reports is really important and really valuable. When we embark on any new project, we're looking at past plans that have been adopted for indicators and information. And we want to do the same thing with the walk audit reports as we look at our sections of road and as we look at our streetscape redesign, so that we're really taking kind of all of the opportunities that we've had to access the public and access our partnership with members of the public in order to move forward in the most informed way. So I think with that, I will wrap up and I will turn it back over to Lisa at Sustainable CT.
Thank you, Amy. All right. So first, I just want to thank all of you for coming today, and of course, give huge thanks and appreciation to our wonderful panelists and participating organizations. And just to wrap everything up, we've heard from the town perspective, the statewide nonprofit perspective through Sustainable CT, organizations dedicated to improving local and statewide transportation, and all of these players coming together to really show that a walk audit is not just about obtaining information, but as we saw through the example in Old Lyme, there's this critical community engagement piece as well, and participatory decision making, and how walk audits can be a conduit for that. We also want to highlight the timeliness of this, because the world at large right now needs spaces where people feel like they can be safe physically and emotionally to walk and be a part of their community. And it's also important to note how vital walkability is to certain residents, where walking to work or the grocery store is not a choice in these communities. So a lack of walkability can be a threat to communities that don't have that choice. And that's another reason why intentional audit routes are so important. So as for next steps, the 2020 Northeast Multimodal and Transit Summit will be held online on November 23rd, next Monday, from 11 a.m. to 7:30 p.m., which is designed to reach transportation professionals and non-professionals alike to help move multimodal topics into daily conversations, policy changes, and state legislation. And as a follow-up to today's walk audit training, there will be an in-person, physically distanced walkability and bikeability audit on the same day, November 23rd, from 8:30 to 10:30 a.m. in Hartford, where participants will gain direct experience on how to conduct a walk and bike audit that may be applied in leading such audits in their home communities. So we hope to see all of you there, and I believe that now we're just going to open up the floor to questions if there are any.
Lisa, thank you so much for wrapping us up. As people are thinking about any lingering questions they might have, I just wanted to invite you all to know that this is an ongoing conversation. So if a question comes to you after today, I know many of us have put our contact information in here. Slides in the recording will be distributed. Tony is a conduit, so he can get you connected to any of us. We hope to hear from many of you and to continue the conversation about walkability and bikeability in Connecticut. So we'll give it just a few more seconds for questions, but otherwise,
Yeah,
you know.
I have a kind of a comment or a question. I don't know how to get recognized. This wasn't waving goodbye. This was my hand up. I hope you can all hear me. I'm Betsy from Buffalo, and Buffalo is I mean, as cities go, it's a fairly large city, second only to New York City and New York State. Our city, I mean, right in the city hall, we had our Health and Wellness Institute with a full-time staffer, and I guess a lot of interns too to help out. But he was the director of that institute, was very big into walking, led walks around the city, and of course was an essential liaison. You know, that was like the bridge between city government, the mayor, and the grassroots advocates for transit and walkable communities and everything else. I realize that a lot of small towns might not have the resources to hire a full-time person to head a wellness institute, but I wonder if that would be a good idea at the county level, maybe, to have a health and wellness institute, which could, you know, help to facilitate, I mean, not only taking care of issues like food deserts and of course, you know, health runs the gamut, but also, you know, helping to get these walkability plans, you know, to give them some teeth and traction. So I guess it's like I'm just tossing it out there as maybe a suggestion. You know, if anyone wants to jump in and comment or whatever. It's just a thought that was occurring to me as I'm, you know, listening to these presentations.
We're all chomping at the bit. Amy, I'm looking. Who wants to take this one?
This is Tony. I can maybe answer a little bit from the Hartford perspective and some of our metro towns. You know, from a community health perspective, I'm seeing in the last few years that connectivity between community health and active transportation getting stronger. The work that Amy was talking about with Hampton Street has been very connected to our Hartford Health Department. And unfortunately, we don't have county governments or a functional county system in the state of Connecticut. We're very municipally isolated, but there are some regionalized efforts in the nearby towns where the health district, I think Rocky Hill, Cromwell, Weathersfield, and Newington, I think they work together, and I've seen them doing walkability and active transportation promotion as a health district. So that connectivity between health and active transportation is an important one, and I'd like to see more of it.
Yeah, I can piggyback on that, and I apologize. I lost you guys for a second, so I only heard a part of the question. But I think that the question was with regard to connections between health and walkability. And in addition to the Slow Streets design, which we did do in partnership with our health department, we've kind of expanded beyond that to talk a bit more about off-road paths, using some of our paths within our parks, and creating some signage to help to encourage walkability within the city. So this has really started, I think, a blossoming sort of partnership with the health department with regard to walkability specifically. And we're wanting to create some pedestrian signage, you know, in the same way that you might see pedestrian signage in the downtown to different landmarks, but in some more of our communities to say, you know, it's just a 10-minute walk to this park, or it's just a 5-minute walk to this community center. So I think that's something that is, that is something that's coming down the line now within the city of Hartford. And I think that's kind of the most direct and natural connection to build off of the work that we have been doing this summer with the Slow Streets project.
Thank you, Amy. There's a question that came in around public outreach. So the question is, what outlets are used to conduct public outreach, and how successful is it, and what's the typical turnout of community members from that outreach? I think several of us could probably speak to this one. I guess I'll just start by saying, the answer is, it depends what your goals are and your target population and the nature of your community. I know Tony spoke about this in the chat a bit, and I also know Cheryl mentioned in her presentation, but it's being aware of your audience. Is this a group that engages with technology? Social media is the place. Are you engaged in a walk audit that's trying to promote a safe opportunity for children to access your school? The school is a critical partner then in coming up with a communication strategy to think about how to reach parents. Flyers, it's we're such a hyper technical world. We sometimes forget that printing out pieces of paper and putting them in people's doors, there's no more effective way to get somebody's attention, since that's becoming, unfortunately, so rare, and in some cases the only viable way to reach someone, depending on what technology is available in their home or their life or not, or what their level of competence is. Obviously being aware of cultural and linguistic factors. We have a very English-centric view of the world, so being aware of who you're trying to reach and what languages it becomes important to reach out. So I'll leave it to others to come up with some of the alternative strategies that might help folks. Anything any of my colleagues want to add?
One of our most, you have to do outreach in all different directions. And some of that outreach it's not even outreach ahead of the event, it's outreach during the event, when you're walking by a bus stop and there's people waiting and you talk to them. Or there's, somebody trying to cross the street to the school, or a local business owner that sticks their head out and asks, what's going on. Like, those are parts of your walk audit that are as important as the invited folks that showed up, the people that are just out there using the street. And if you can get them to stop for a couple of minutes and chat, that's important. But one of the things that we found, to be the most effective is our local email lists, that we, continue to build, and getting connected to other existing organizations and asking them to share through their local email list, which is still, a way that it hasn't been entirely monetized like social media. So you can still get directly to people. So that's one thing we do in addition to all the other outreaches.
That's great. Cheryl, there's a question that I'm going to direct toward you in the chat, because I think this speaks a little bit to some of your approach. And the question is, have you ever mixed walking audits with more social walking clubs for folks, or those who want a more casual walking experience? So capitalizing upon those who just walk because they walk.
Well, we only have done the 2 audits. So I want to find the question and reread it in my head one more. Okay, Stephanie's question. No, I think it's a great idea. We do have running clubs in town and biking, clubs. They're informal, but groups that get together to walk or run. We have a lot of open space here with land trusts and the town. So I think, one thing would be to put up flyers in those locations where people walk or hike. But it could be a great idea to do something in a more casual way for the audits. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer.
That's great. Well, if we didn't capture your question in the chat. I'm looking through and I see there's a lot of great comments and thoughts and supplemental answers to some of our questions, but I think we answered them all. You know, in scanning the chat, one other thing that I just wanted to acknowledge is, and it's been mentioned by others, the critical role of local health departments and health districts. Hopefully you all know that every town in Connecticut, either within municipal government, has its own health department, or a number of towns together might form a health district. It's a quasi governmental entity that kind of looks a little bit like a nonprofit because they're governed by a board of directors, and then there are representatives from each town's government that oversee it. But there's tremendous interest in the public health community in creating safe spaces and in understanding that how a community moves has a profound impact on public health. So I think you'll all find strong partners. Maybe not in the height of the pandemic, resources are very stretched, but in your local health departments and districts. So with that, I think we'll close. Thanks to everyone for a wonderful event today, and looking forward to seeing many of you either in person at the walk audit we'll be having November 23rd. The goal of that experience is for you to get the direct experience of participating in one if you haven't, and our hope is that you'll all take that experience back to your communities to participate in the leadership role as we spread this important tool across the state. So thanks so much to everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Keep up the great stuff.